Enable client connectivity. Hey everyone, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to talk about a few steps that you need to go through in order to ensure that your clients can connect to the Office 365 services. And that means we're going to cover, very briefly, proxy server configuration, firewall port opening, bandwidth allotment, and internet connectivity, general internet connectivity. An important planning step for setting up Office 365 in your environment is ensuring that your clients can connect to the Office 365 tenant on the web. So we talked a little bit in another nugget about setting up DNS records, and those are all about ensuring that communication from the wider public internet is able to get into your Office 365 tenant. The example I used was an email that's sent to somebody at your custom domain. Well, you want to make sure that those emails are delivered to Office 365, to your Exchange Online account. Well, client connectivity is a little bit different. Client connectivity is all about allowing the users inside of your organization to access Office 365 on the web. If you have anything more than a trivial enterprise security setup, this is going to require a few steps, some different tests, and some diagnostics to ensure that you're appropriately set up to connect to the Office 365 services. One of the first things you want to take a look at is whether or not you have any proxy configuration software set up, particularly any proxy servers that require authentication on outbound connections. This is going to be a common sort of setup to help protect your users from either accessing dangerous websites or accessing things on the internet they shouldn't be accessing. But what it can do is it can cause trouble communicating with the Office 365 services. One of the things that you're going to need to do is, if you do have a proxy server with authentication enabled and you can't change that, you need to talk about selectively enabling or whitelisting the services that you need to access. Now, there are way too many to go through inside of this nugget, and I'll be frank, you're not going to get tested on these URLs or what these services are. For the test, you need to know that yes, you have to enable these services. You have to open up your proxy configuration to these services. I've got a URL on screen here. And if I just bring up that document really quick, here you can see a really great list of all of the different addresses that you need to use, as well as some good definitions and explanations for why you need to do this in the first place. So if we're looking at, the Exchange Office 365 portal, expand this out. Here's all of the different addresses that you need to allow through. Here is your destination IP and your destination ports. So they really get very detailed in explaining to you all the things that you need to open up through your proxy server configuration. I highly recommend you bookmark this document. Another neat thing to have here is that you can subscribe via RSS, so you can get notifications when these endpoints change, and you can ensure that your proxy configuration stays updated with the latest changes to the Office 365 environment. Now, once you've performed that step and enabled or opened up your proxy to those services, you also need to ensure that your firewall is configured right to let these ports outbound. Much more common and much more likely than a proxy server is going to be your firewall server, your basic secure firewall server on your organization. And you need to ensure that you have all of these different TCP, UDP, and TLS ports opened up in order to allow traffic to and from Office 365. A lot of it is fairly standard stuff. Obviously 443 and 80, which are web ports. There's 25, which is an SMTP port. Some of it is more unusual. You can see over here, Skype for Business Online outbound phone is going to require that big range of UDP ports to be open. So once again, you won't need to have this list for the exam. You do need to have this list for configuring your environment. But what you need to know is that outbound firewall ports need to be opened and set up in order for communication to work properly. You can find all of these ports also listed in that same support document that I just showed you inside of Microsoft's documentation. Now, some other things that you need to worry about or you need to consider when you're setting up your configuration is going to be bandwidth allotment. How much bandwidth do you need to properly take advantage of Office 365? So as you're moving services out of your local on-premise data center and into the cloud, I'm making my air quotes with my fingers there, yeah, you're going to need to consider your outbound and your inbound bandwidth. You're no longer talking about traffic just moving around on your internal network. Now you're talking about traffic that's moving around on the wider public internet. And identifying how much bandwidth you need is really going to be a case-by-case basis. It's going to involve what services you're using, how many users you have, and a whole host of other complex configurations that we're not going to be able to talk about here. What you do need to know is that there are a number of tools that you can use, calculators, that will help you determine how much bandwidth you're going to need. And these are the three that you really want to remember for the exam, the 70-346 test. You've got the Exchange Client Network Bandwidth Calculator, the Skype for Business Online Bandwidth Calculator, and the OneDrive for Business Synchronization Calculator. These three calculators are really going to help you figure out how much connectivity or how much bandwidth you need. And I've got another link on screen here that you can use to get to the support documentation that has access to these tools, as well as walks you through a number of different troubleshooting steps or research steps to perform for bandwidth allotment. If I just bring that up, you can see here we've got a whole document on network and migration planning for Office 365. And that includes how you can estimate bandwidth requirements, the calculators and tools that you need to test your connectivity, including the remote connectivity analyzer. That's a great way to test to make sure that you've got the appropriate connectivity set up to the service itself, bandwidth aside. So a lot of really great informative tools that you can use to help understand if you are properly set up to use Office 365. And then the final step, the final thing that you need to consider, may be a little bit obvious, but yeah, you need appropriate internet connectivity for your clients and for your users. And this is typically something that you or your IT office is going to have well under control. But a couple of points that you need to know: your IP addresses for your clients need to be outside of the AP/IPA range, which means they cannot be in the 169.254 range. Those are not viable or accessible IP addresses for your clients. They do have to have a default gateway that is routable to the internet. So their gateway doesn't have to be connected directly to the internet, but it does have to have a route to get out to the internet, of course. I mean, this is all basic internet connectivity stuff. And then, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, you got to have the right firewall ports and proxy server connections set up so that they can reach the Office 365 services on the internet. So that concludes this nugget on enabling client connectivity. Just to recap, proxy server configuration. You got to configure your proxy server appropriately, either to disable authentication for those clients who will be using Office 365 or opening up the proper endpoints. You need to also configure the appropriate firewall ports for outbound connectivity, and you need to ensure that you have the appropriate amount of bandwidth allotted to the users who will be using the Office 365 services. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.